Before we get into talking about the different type of meters and things, I want to talk to you about the batteries. All electrical test meters that measure resistance and continuity or temperature have batteries, whether they are analog or digital meters. With the cost of meters, it is important to check and replace the batteries at least every 6 months, or at least check them to make sure that they're not leaking. Battery damage can cost you the price of a new meter. We all have our favorite meter, and if it got damaged due to a leaky battery, it can be kind of heartbreaking. Be sure and check your batteries. I'd advise you to do that right now. As HVACR service technicians or install technicians, we have to check different conditions on the electrical side of our units. And what are we checking for? Well, we're looking for AC or DC volts. We're looking for AC amps and DC microamps for flame rectification. We're also looking for ohms or resistance. We're checking continuity. We'd like to know what our capacitant reactance is on our capacitors. And we also check for temperature. The older meters didn't do this. You had to have different meters that did different jobs. This is a 32-year-old microntometer made for Radio Shack. It is still functional, but it has its limits. This meter, it can check for AC and DC volts, DC microamps for flame rectification. It can also test for ohms or resistance and also continuity. That's the limitations that it had. This was a very good meter for what it was capable of doing. We had to use other meters for AC amps, capacitance, reactance, checking your capacitors, and also temperature. This meter is actually an excellent meter for people that work on circuit boards and things like that also. But like I said, it's still functional, but it is a little outdated. So it's been taken out of service. This is a 15-year-old UEI clamp-on meter. This meter had its restrictions also, or its limitations. It was limited to AC volts, AC amps, and ohms only for checking resistance. It didn't do microfarads or anything other than volts, amps, and ohms AC. Use this with the Micronta analog meter because its limitations did not do amp draw. So there you go. Between the two meters, I was able to pretty much cover everything I needed as far as volts, amps, and ohms. This Syntec clamp meter has a lot of the capabilities that we're looking for in a meter. It does AC volts, it does DC volts, it does ohms for resistance, and it also does amperage. It doesn't do temperature, and it doesn't check for flame rectification, doesn't do DC amps. And the banana clips for this meter also work on the other analog meters and also will fit into the digital meters. The insulated type banana clips that we have on the newer meters will not plug into this meter or the analog meters. The type K thermocouples that you see here and the adapters are for meters that have the capability of reading dry bulb temperature only. This could be a Fluke handheld dry bulb thermometer and you're using a type K thermocouple. We can also hook them in some of our meters. Using the analog meters that only tested ohms and continuity, we needed a way to also check for capacitance reactance. This meter only does capacitance reactance, and it reads it in microfarads. We would disconnect the power wire onto the capacitor, and we would drain the power off of the capacitor. We would hook this meter up to it, push the button, and it would tell us what the microfarads of that capacitor were. There are basically two types of banana clips that we plug into our meters. The uninsulated banana clips will fit most all handheld, analog, and digital meters, even the newer ones. If they can plug in with a banana style clip, these banana clips will work. The insulated banana clips will only work on the newer digital meters like Fluke and Fieldpiece, and they won't plug into the old analogs and even some of the older digital handhelds. This is the Fluke 16 meter. It does AC volts, it does DC volts, it does ohms, it does continuity, it does capacitance reactance, it does DC amps for flame rectification, and it also can check a diode for you. It does not do amperage. That is for AC. That's kind of important. It's overall a good meter though, kind of pricey. Now this is the Fluke 116. This meter is a little bit more fancy than the Fluke 16, but it does everything the same. This meter does have the capabilities of checking AC volts and frequency, DC volts, DC microamps for flame rectification, ohms for resistance, also checks continuity, and it also can do capacitance, reactance, and temperature. It can do everything that you would really want to do out in the field except amperage. That is its only drawback. But it is kind of pricey, but it is a good meter. There are other temperature reading tools that we use. The type K thermocouple dry bulb thermometer. This just measures dry bulb temperature. That's all it did. We could take a temperature reading of our liquid refrigerant line. We could take a temperature reading of our saturated vapor line coming back to the condensing unit by taping the end of the thermocouple onto the copper itself. Then we also have a sling psychrometer. A sling psychrometer does wet bulb and dry bulb temperatures, and it's slid together. The inner goes in, and the numbers are matched up to get your wet bulb and your dry bulb temperatures for your relative humidity. And it's kind of antiquated now, but that was the deal back then. That's what we used. You'd walk around a commercial building and you would be using your sling psychrometer, and somebody would ask you, well, what are you doing? You'd say, well, I'm just slinging my thing. Well, we sure have progressed now that we have pocket psychrometers. These little jewels right here fit right in your pocket. You open them up, you can set them in a room, and they will read wet bulb temperature, dry bulb temperature. They also tell you relative humidity, and they also calculate dew point. Really cool. We have really progressed from the sling psychrometers and the dry bulb thermometers that we used to use. This is the Fieldpiece SC77. It's a discontinued model now. I got this about 10 years ago. I love this meter. The capabilities of this meter are pretty cool. It does AC volts, does AC amps, it does DC amps for flame rectification. It does capacitance reactance measured in microfarads. It does temperature with a type K thermocouple with no adapter needed. It does ohms for your resistance. It does continuity. It does DC volts, and it also has a really cool little function. You push the button and it's no contact volts. Instead of touching the wire to see if it's hot, you push the button, get your meter close to it. If it sounds off, then you know you got a hot wire. Pretty cool meter. This is the type of meter that I would strongly suggest people be looking for. If you're going to buy a meter, buy one. Get all of the capabilities that you can in one meter. I do not have any strong recommendation for any manufacturer but you've got to look at what the capabilities of the meters are. You want to get something that you don't have to plug a lot of stuff into. This one here does everything. The only external thing you've got to plug on here is the type K thermocouple. Everything else is pretty much right with it. I cannot stress enough, don't become meter rich and money poor. Shop to get exactly what you want. Don't settle.